just the rapid pace for change in all the other areas of our life that translates into other expectations that other things should change and move as fast as well, when in reality that's not the case. So how do organizations respond, and what are some of the things they should consider? It overall starts with a more clean element of transparency and communication on the front end. A lot of employers, they paint this incredible vision and excitement about working at their companies during the candidate experience because they want to attract talent. They're competing against other companies for this talent. So they paint this incredible visual of what it's like to work here and all the promotions and growth opportunities someone's going to have once they start working there. And then someone starts working there and they quickly realize, oh, the growth opportunities aren't actually here right away. They're much further down the road. And that's very disappointing and disengaging. There's a huge opportunity to clean up some of that conversational transparency on the front end to set the right expectations around the employee experience and what it's like there. Are you actually being transparent about expectations and promises and things that you're going to provide once an employee starts working for you? And that's not even just Gen Z, that's anyone working for your company.
Hi, I'm Denise Chaffin, host of Talking TA. And today I have with me Zach Doms with Achieve Engagement. I want to make sure I got that right. And I met Zach at the Transform 2024 conference, and we've had another conversation since then as well. So I am honored to have you, Zach, on the podcast today so that we can talk about a couple of different topics. One being, I think, Gen Z in the workplace, and the other, of course, the employee experience. I will let you go ahead and introduce yourself and your company.
Yeah, thank you, Denise. So Zach Doms here. I lead the community in the programming and really as a partner of Achieve Engagement. And we're a global HR people leader community. We've had around 26,000 program alumni and community members who really all engage with our network to rethink the ways in which we can achieve engagement. And we do that by doing all sorts of different types of things, whether it's research, leadership exchange type peer-to-peer experiences, webinars and webcasts, virtual seminars. Really, we're trying to develop these learning experiences to bring together new thought leadership, new insights, stories from the field, strategies and new models that HR leaders and people leaders and practitioners can then utilize to take action on within their own organization to make a bigger impact on the employee experience and the cultures that they serve. So it's a very fun and engaging community. We're doing a lot all the time. It's nonstop. It's a lot of fun for me, but yeah, that's a little bit about us and what we're doing.
Fabulous. What is it that brought you guys to Transform a Guest to discuss Gen Z in the workplace? There was a longer title to that panel.
Yeah, no, that was a fun panel and discussion. As you remember, we had a packed room for that one. I think it was like standing room only. People were sitting on the floor. I mean, I was just so happy about the attendance and also just the engagement and the discussions that we had. So that session was called Gen Z at Work, How Engagement Shapes Retention. And that was one part of a larger series that we did throughout all of Q1. So what was really cool about that experience was throughout the first quarter of the year, we've done maybe 3 or 4 executive dinners and roundtable discussions on this topic. We led a whole research initiative where we were crowdsourcing stories and strategies from the field. We also wanted to get some data from Gen Z themselves around what are they looking for from their employers? What do they desire from the employee experience that HR executives and organizations should be aware of so that they can better engage this group as they very quickly take over the workforce. I think the statistics that we found in our research by 2025 or 2026, it might have been a little later, but Gen Z will make up about 30% of the workforce, which is a very strong percentage. So if you want to have a thriving, productive organization, you're going to have to figure out a way to engage and work with this generation.
And that's a global number,
Correct.
right?
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
30%?
I mean,
Right.
most of our respondents in our research were in the United States, but we do have a global audience. So, but yeah, it was really interesting unpacking that a little bit with the executives during that discussion. And it was interesting some of the things we talked about, right? Like the desire to provide more professional development opportunities and mentorship and coaching. That's something that Gen Z strongly looks for as they build their careers. Another piece was connection and relationship building. Gen Z also looks for more peer-to-peer opportunities and wants a deeper relationship with the people they work with every single day and different people across departments, and just an overarching deeper relationship with the organization that they work with. So relationships and professional development were kind of two main themes. And then the third theme that we really learned through our research and that we unpacked in that panel discussion was also Gen Z's desire to work for a company that prioritizes well-being and certain cultural social initiatives within their company culture. So how as a company are you supporting my mental health and my well-being, and on top of that, how are you as an organization engaging with some of the social challenges and issues that are happening within our world. So whether that's things related to DEI and inclusion and belonging, whether that includes some of the social political issues that are happening within our society, Gen Z really looks for their organization to participate in those conversations and kind of have at least some values that support these things that are really important to this group.
I think that's fabulous. Now, do you find that this type of feedback that you're getting from this particular generation coming up is because of experiences that they're having? Is it because of education backgrounds for a lot of
Yeah,
these
that's
people?
a great question. So I think it could be a number of factors. I think the rise obviously with technology and access to information and the rise of certain media channels really just showcasing economic and social issues that are happening in the world. I mean, anytime you log into any social media outlet, you're kind of bombarded with this message that there's all these issues that are happening within the world, which is very true. These things are happening, uh, but Gen Z being one of the generations that grew up in technology, grew up with social media from the very beginning, they're very exposed and considered what they would say woke in these initiatives. They've really prioritized it. It's part of their upbringing, and it's part of kind of the worldview that they developed as they grew up in the world.
I like it.
I agree.
I think it's great. I know that the baby boomer generation and also I want to say Gen
Yeah.
X, right? What came after baby boomers, basically didn't
Hmm.
have this exposure. So didn't have this education and this knowledge base to be able to formulate these kind of, hey, this is what it's going to take for us to be happy in the workplace. I mean,
Yeah.
people just got jobs out of school, right? And even if you had an education, a college education, oftentimes you get a job offer, you take the job. You didn't like think about professional development. You just were thinking about how am I going to fit into this company, or what am I going to do, and when
Right.
is my next promotion type of thing. But that wasn't like the first thought you had, and it wasn't on the in the front of your mind when you got out of college and started jobs.
Totally. And with the rise of more technologies and automation and things just happening at a rapid pace in so many areas of our life, things are just quickly moving and changing and happening. There tends to be this like connection and expectation to that in our careers as well, where Gen Z's going, well, everything else is changing really fast and everything else develops very fast within the world and how things are automated and happening and everything's quick. So why wouldn't my career develop that fast as well? Why wouldn't I move to this next promotion that fast in some way too? So a lot of Gen Z,
Oh, I do hear about that. Yeah, that they want it all right now.
yeah, a lot of Gen Z, they expect to be promoted or invested into within the first 6 to 12 months of their job. Where I think a lot of times when you ask Boomers, Gen X, and even Millennials, the expectation was more of like 1 to 2 years, if anything, right?
Or
Like
5 to
that's when you
10,
like
yeah,
you're
depending on what you're doing. Yeah.
yeah, even more. Yeah, right. Yeah, totally. And I think that was another big point that was brought up in that panel discussion as well of like, especially I think it was Claude who's chief people officer or heart officer for VaynerMedia. She shared that a lot of some of these Gen Z talent and employees, they're willing to leave the organization within the 6 to 12 months if they're not promoted or offered a promotion. And they may not even have an opportunity lined up that they're leaving. So they're willing to quit and be unemployed for the sake of the fact that they're not given a promotion, right? So there's some interesting tensions there around um, the expectations on both sides, right? So there's like expectations that Gen Z has, and then obviously from a pipeline standpoint, and even what's possible for organizations to provide, those expectations kind of clash in many ways.
So what is the community, the employer community saying about this? What's the solution? Or I should say the strategy, if you will, to build solution.
For this generation and some of the challenges.
Yeah, and trying to meet their demands or to at least meet them
Mhm.
halfway, if you would, to keep them employed without them jumping off
Yeah,
after
yeah,
6
yeah.
months or a
Because
year.
in some just reality cases, you just don't have promotion opportunities just open all the time, right? Like that's not if the especially in the current kind of economic landscape, companies just don't they're just not growing and all the time. So there's not just always expansion and new roles and promotional opportunities.
Well, not only that, but you need to work first and understand your
Yeah.
current role that
Yeah.
you've hired for. You have to kinda it takes time to grow into another role
Hmm.
or to advance yourself. I mean, there's a learning curve that happens, right? And just organically when you start a new position or start with a new company, you need to learn about the company. You need to learn about their products and their services and who the other departments are and how they all interact and the cross-functional nature, right, of all these different departments. So how can you expect to jump ahead that quickly when it takes time to I mean, it's not like you can go from kindergarten to 5th
Hmm.
grade overnight, right? You have to go through
Yeah.
1st
Yeah.
grade, 2nd grade, 3rd grade. I mean, it's a transition, a slower transition.
Just the rapid pace for change in all the other areas of our life that translates into other expectations that other things should change and move as fast as well. When in reality, that's not the case. So, how do organizations respond and what are some of the things they should consider? So, one, I think it's overall starts with a more clean element of transparency and communication on the front end, right? So a lot of times, and I think this is actually a series that we're initiating into Q2 here, which is more around how do you connect the candidate experience to the employee experience and make it a more smooth and engaging transition so that after a candidate becomes an employee, they actually stay engaged and they're excited and not disappointed. And one of the disconnects that we found is a lot of employers, they paint this incredible vision and excitement about working at their companies during the kind of experience because they want to attract talent. They're competing against other companies for this talent. So they paint this incredible visual of what it's like to work here and the promotions and growth opportunities someone's going to have once they start working there. And then someone starts working there and they quickly realize, oh, the growth opportunities aren't actually here right away. They're much further down the road. And that's very disappointing and disengaging. So I think there's a huge opportunity to clean up some of that kind of conversational transparency on the front end to set the right expectations around the employee experience and what it's like there. So that's one thing I would check if I'm an employer. Are you actually being transparent about expectations and promises and things that you're going to provide once an employee starts working for you? And that's not even just Gen Z, that's anyone working for your company, right? You might not be able to offer promotions all the time, like to anyone and everyone that wants it. But a huge other opportunity to kind of keep people engaged when you're not able to provide those things is the professional development opportunities. So, providing mentorship programs, peer to peer coaching, offer them exposure into projects that are cross functional and different things that are outside of their role and scope of work. These are all things you can do right now that can maybe offset the expectation to be promoted while you're still saying, hey, we're not able to actually open up just a random new leadership position or another role, but we are trying to expose you to these different things to help you grow as a professional. And that might take one of those individuals that are like, I'm clocking out after 6 months, and keep them for 12, 18 months, right? That's one thing I would definitely consider. And then the connection building and then the peer to peer relationship building piece. I think we can all agree that we've stayed at some jobs either shorter or longer because of the relationships we had at it, right? Whether it's a relationship with a bad manager, that will quickly get someone out of the workforce. On the other end, if they have a best friend at work, a relationship with their manager, really love their leader that they work with, they will stick it out in most cases, even if they dislike their job. Like the relationship kind of overpowers some of that stuff. So, how do you maybe double down on relationships that can really keep kind of that connection and that glue to your company and get them again over that 6 month hump and into the 12-month, 18-month retention bucket?
Well, that brings up another question then. So let's say somebody is staying in their role because they really have a great relationship with their manager, but they still want that promotion. And let's say eventually, after 2 or 3 years, that promotion comes open, that person has stayed on board, but now they go and work for a manager that maybe they don't have that same relationship with. Then what
I mean,
happens,
that's
right?
that's the fun of organizational, mobility, right? Like that that's
Yeah.
that's a
How do you
whole
keep,
other
yeah,
thing, right? Where yeah, 100%, like you're gonna get moved to a new team probably once you move and get promoted potentially, and that's gonna bring in a whole new relationship, which again is just more of a reinforcement around organizations thinking about kind of the different levels of relationship building that they need to build. Not only do you want to build deeper relationships within their immediate teams, but you want to get them to start building relationships cross-functional and up the ladder within the organization, and all these different directions, so that when people do move into new roles and departments, that relationship's already built, at least foundationally, right? So, and then on the other end, if they work on a new team and they have a poor relationship with the leader, maybe that's more of a reflection of your leadership practices, and you need to evaluate what type of behaviors your leaders are presenting, and you want to get rid of your
exactly. There it
toxic
is.
leaders, right?
There
Like
it is.
even if they are really smart and they
Right.
provided some great value, the worst thing that can happen is having a toxic employee internally at your organization that is almost like they call them like an energy vampire sucker, right? Like they kill the energy around them. Now you have a whole team that's disengaged and not performing. So that's more of an issue on
Yeah.
some of the cultural stuff that's happening. So something we talked about a lot during in Q1, we also had a whole campaign around talent development and leadership development practices and initiatives, including like talent identification, as well as career pathing that aligns with like developmental pathing with individuals. Huge initiative that a lot of companies are pushing in right now are individual development plans for their people. And all of these things kind of connect in a number of ways with your performance management and performance enablement practices. And I think one again starts on the front end with a clear conversation around expectations around what is it expected to succeed or exceed in this role you're in today, and then talking with your people and say, hey, where do you want to go? Where's your career aspirations? Like what direction are you trying to take your career in your life? And if they don't know, help them discover that. I think that's a really exciting role that a leader in an organization can have, is helping people find clarity on those things. So once you map out those career aspirations with them, you can start to also provide clarity on, okay, here's the next checkpoint that you're trying to get to. Here's the skill sets and competencies that it takes to thrive and succeed in this role. Which ones do you have or don't have? Okay, let's map that out. Now you're also then helping them create their developmental plans, right? Like, okay, we want you to get there. Here's what is needed for someone in this role to succeed and for someone to be qualified for that role. So let's develop a developmental plan for you that makes you competent for that role, right? So that's where you go, okay, cool. We're going to have to get you some mentorship. We're going to have to get you through this certification program. And while we're doing that, in order for someone to be qualified internally to kind of mobily move into a higher level role, you also have to meet these expectations in your current role. And that goes into some of the talent identification practices that we discussed this last quarter. Was, have they demonstrated achieving their expected results, if anything exceeding those results right now and in the past? That's like kind of checkpoint one. Checkpoint two is, do they then like demonstrate the right behaviors and competencies to be qualified for this next role? That's checkpoint two. And then checkpoint three, we kind of talked about, was, do they demonstrate will and a excitement to keep growing and moving into bigger roles and expectations? Because the next thing they're going into is going to be harder. It's going to require more of them, and it's going to require like bigger goals and objectives. So they kind of, that's the way we kind of framed it up, is, have they demonstrated results? Do they demonstrate the right behaviors that align with the role that we're kind of transitioning them into? And do they have a greater will to take on more? Because that's what the next stage of life looks like.
Well, and let me ask you though, because you mentioned a while ago to start with the candidate experience, kind of setting these. I love what you said, cleaner and be cleaner
Yeah.
transparency at the very beginning, right? So if you're going to bring somebody in and you're going to set those goals, like what you're talking about, do you have that conversation then while they're a candidate before they even get hired?
I would 100%. Yeah, I think
Yeah,
so. Where you want to know,
I think that's
and
important.
especially if you're going to attract top talent, like truly top talent, people who are, going to make a big impact on your organization, they have higher aspirations. Like they definitely do. Every top talent, they have bigger things that they want to grow into. So you should try to find that out on the front end, and then already start having those conversations about what it's going to be like once they work for your organization to reach those aspirations, and what you both can do in a collaboration, because it goes both ways. There's, hey, we're going to help develop you into that future person that you're trying to grow into, but we also have the expectation that you're going to fulfill these results and these objectives that your current role needs to fulfill. So it's like, we're both working together here, not like you don't get this without that, and we're going to help you get, like, we're your ally to get there too.
Yeah. I think we're going to have to get really granular though with some of the people with respect to when you set these goals and say these are the
Yeah.
milestones that you're going to have to meet, and be very clear like you said about what those milestones are, because you don't want to
Mhm.
set them up to fail. And the other thing is while they're trying to develop themselves with programs and advancing through these milestones, how do we keep them in their seat and keep them focused on the job at hand? Are they so busy? Is the eye on the
The
blingy
subject.
future job going to keep them? Yeah, going to distract them from
Yeah.
doing what they need to do
Yeah, I
now.
mean, that's always, I think, a human challenge of, we're often focused more on the future or the past rather than like what's immediate right in front of us, right? Like that's just human nature. And this misalignment in expectations, right? So there's this, hey, the future is actually, for me as Gen Z and even millennials, I think too, I've fallen into this bucket as a millennial where I'm like, I expect to move up quick. And I think my future role and opportunity is actually going to be here in July. Like my next big thing's here in July. When in reality, I might not have that big thing until the end of the year, right? So I think we're all aspirational, and sometimes maybe there's a lack of patience in our society as a whole, right? And we have to remind myself, and I had to remind myself as a business owner too, where I have these aspirations for our business and our community and how much growth it's going to have and all the products and programs we're going to be doing. But in reality, like those things just don't grow and develop that fast. Like it takes years for some of these to come to fruition. And that's been hard as a business owner where I'm like, I want this thing to be here today. And I have to remind myself to be patient all the time where I'm like, okay, Zach, it's coming. Just keep building, taking monumental steps forward. It will come, but you had to be patient. And in reality, the world's not that fast. Like it seems fast because of the how things move online, but in reality, I think there's levels of patience required both in our careers and our businesses and the things that we're trying to build in our life.
So how do we help people to develop patience then?
I could take a lesson on that myself, I think. But I mean, I think the one way I've learned is just hearing through the stories of other people and talking to other business owners. Like I remember I was in a masterclass recently with a bunch of entrepreneurs, and one of the leaders was kind of presenting their story about their business, and this individual has been in the game for 20 years. And he's talking about how long it took to build this like enterprise that he's been leading. It took him 20 years, and I've been in the game for 5, right? Like as a business owner. So that makes me think, oh my gosh, I have 15 more years before it gets there. So it's like you put that in perspective, I think, through the stories and examples and case studies of other people going through it. So that's another maybe example of someone coming up in their career and going, okay, I want to become a CHRO someday. Maybe that's my career aspiration. And I'm an HR business partner right now, or entry level assistant HR business partner or something like that. Talking to your CHROs and saying, hey, tell me about your career journey. What were the steps that it took to get there? How long did that take? And I think you'll talk to some of the CHROs and they're like, I've been in the industry for 20, 25 years. For my first 15 of it, I was in these entry mid-level roles, right? And it wasn't until I built myself, got exposed to all these different elements of HR, built up kind of my resume of experience and expertise that made me now qualified for a CHRO position. And then I think people quickly realized, okay, wow, this is a longer game than I thought, right? Um, so yeah, it really is.
Anything is though. Anything is. There's a woman that I know, interesting you bring that up. There's a woman I know who I worked with years ago at an electronics company. She was working on helping people to get like visas, people who needed to have a relocation packages. I'm trying to think of how I would describe her role. It was an HR role. It had nothing to do with talent acquisition, right? And so at one point or another, somebody hired her into a talent acquisition role, and she had never
Mhm.
recruited one day in her life. And then all of a sudden, she wound up getting promoted into this director of talent acquisition role, and she had never worked as a recruiter. So all of a sudden, she started running into problems, and she's calling all of us who've been recruiting our whole lives. And yes, we've advanced ourselves, but to your point, it took us a while to get to where we were,
Yeah.
and we had to be in the trenches. Because if you're not in the trenches, how are you going to learn
Yeah.
to be an effective leader? You can mentor people better if you've already been in their role before and say, oh, that happened to me before, blah, blah, blah. And this is how we worked through it before. But if you've never been there, how are you going to tackle issues and problems? So this poor woman was calling all of us all the time. Okay, I've got this situation. How should I handle it? It's like, I asked her and I go, how did you like wind up in this
Correct.
position? You were in HR, you were doing compensation stuff and relocation and helping people get visas and whatnot. How did you wind up here? She said, well, they had a need at the time and I was working for the company. And so they knew I had been in HR. And so they kind of stuck me in this role and here I am. She, but all of a sudden now she crashes and
Yeah. So
burns, right?
yeah.
If you don't work up through the ranks, you miss out on such a big chunk of what you need in order
Yeah,
to
and
be an
that's why I
effective
kinda
leader.
talked about those checkpoints before when it comes to kind of talent
Right.
identification, and I'm gonna throw, like a wrench out to those that love the 9-box model out there. I know that's like a common talent kinda evaluation model where you kinda map out your high performance. A lot of executives love it. A lot of HR leaders have been using it for a long time. It's been kind of the traditional model to identifying top performers and your superstars and things like that. But what happens in that process of using the 9-box model, it's often very biased, right? So, do you like this person? Do you have a good relationship with them? That often plays a role of like when leaders are plotting who they're going to promote or put into certain roles. And in some cases, it becomes a little bit more of like a political conversation, right? So she might have had a great relationship with certain leaders. They got along really well. There's some trust there. Maybe she did demonstrate some really great behaviors as a leader, like a good listener, a good mentor, and a coach, and things that, qualities that it take to be a really good leader. But again, back to the other kind of checkpoint model that I talked about, the first checkpoint is have they demonstrated exceeding or expected results in the role that they're leading, right? So it's like they have to have that checkpoint
Mhm.
first to be considered. And then it's, have they demonstrated the right cultural behaviors and leadership behaviors to go into this role? Um, that's a very essential steps that they have to go through. And the first step of
It
demonstrating
is.
results,
It
it
is.
sounds like that's an example where she did have to do that. She just went straight to the be able
Yeah.
to.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly there
Right.
were no
Which
steps
in
for
some
her.
cases that's awesome. Like I've had, I mean, selfishly scenarios in the corporate world where I got thrown in roles that maybe I shouldn't have been thrown in. And I was like so excited to do that for
Yeah,
personally, because I was like, okay, new challenge, new world. I get to develop and grow. But
sure.
hey, when I look back at those days, the early versions of being in that role were tough because I was like her. I was calling people up
Yeah.
and being like, what the heck do we do here? I don't even know what this world is.
And how do you even know you're gonna
Yeah.
like it? You know what I mean? And like you said, it could be a jumping off point, or it could be a learning curve into some other position or some other area of business that you didn't expect to fall into. But I don't know how often that's going to be a successful plan. But like you, and I like your idea of setting these goals though, and also going back to what we were talking about earlier, starting at the candidate level before we
Hmm.
even hire people, so that we don't bring them on with these expectations that they are going to advance. Well, let me ask you a question, Zach. So when you are giving this advice to employers, do you guys also provide some of those checkpoints or some of the tools, if you would, to establish those goals?
Yeah, 100%. So part of our, I guess, community experience and the way that we work with our members and build out some of these practices is through masterminds and master classes, where not only do we train our leaders in the network with, the concept, the model, the strategy, and just provide them with that like training, but we're also providing them with the workbooks, the field guides, the actual templates to actually customize it back to their company. So that's kind of I guess phase one of how we work with our members is, hey, we're going to train you as a leader to upskill you to be, more intentional about how you identify talent, for example. And then, hey, we're also going to give you the workbook and the spreadsheets and the pre-made templates and materials that you can use and customize for your company and your culture and these different roles so that you can actually stand up that function. And then kind of like the next level to that, because a lot of times still some of our members are like, Zach, that's great. I got the material, I got the training, I understand it. I could still use some help in rolling this out and standing it up. And that's where we'll actually come in and do some like coaching, consulting, and we'll actually come in house and work directly with our partners one on one and actually, help them stand up these functions. Because, yeah, it is sometimes a heavy lift. And some of our HR partners are like, yes, I can run with this on my own. Some of them are like, no, I could use some more hand holding, some more training and support. And that's where we'll actually go in house and work one on one with them.
Now, is there a limit to the number of employees a company has to have in order for you guys to support them? In other words, can you support small business and medium size, or are you mostly targeting enterprise level companies?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say majority of our times it's that small to mid-sized organization, typically just because they're
Really?
usually like an HR department of one. So it's more of a capacity challenge sometimes. They're just
Oh,
like, hey, I already have this huge scope of work, but we have to execute this thing. Could you come in house and help be almost like an extension to our HR department that can help us like execute these things quicker, right? For the enterprise people, we do work with a lot of those types of clients, but it's less of like in the trenches in the weeds standing it up and more as like an advisory strategic partner and just helping consult and maybe working with their HR business partners who will actually be the ones executing this. Yeah.
and
So
providing the tools.
that might be more of like a strategic consultant, like advisor type role, where some of those small to mid-sized people, they're like, no, Zach, we need you in the trenches with us and actually doing and executing this. And that's like maybe like a different way that we would work with them.
Very good. I think this is a great solution, actually. And let's go back real quick to the conversation at Transform and the panel that was there and some of the discussion around this. What was some of because I know that there was a lot of question and answers and whatnot. What did you guys, when you left that panel, what did you guys glean from the feedback that you had from the audience that was there?
Yeah, I think one that was interesting that I know has been like a constant challenge for employers is how do we engage with the mental health and the social issues that Gen Z wants us to talk about, right? Like, how do we, there's the things happening in Gaza, there's the George Floyd situation that happened in 2020, COVID, there's all these political, social challenges happening in the world, and Gen Z and younger generations desire organizations to take a stance or at least be in the conversation. And it's really hard for companies to kind of decide what they're doing with that because they're a company. They're here to make money. They have a certain agenda to their shareholders and things like that. So they're not nonprofits, social impact driven companies, yet they're expected to engage with this stuff. So I thought that was one thing that was really interesting about the panel discussion was how, Sarah, Claude, and Heba were talking about, as executives and HR leaders, how they're starting to engage with it, whether it was, hey, we're not taking dedicated stances on these things. We're not saying, hey, this is the we're not Republican or Democrat or we're standing with this type of political agenda, but they're saying, hey, no, we're just more of holding space and having conversations about it. We're empowering our employees with the ability to form employee resource groups and certain sub communities internally with things that align with their passions. And that's been pretty useful in terms of allowing the culture and the company to participate in these things without it actually taking somewhat of like a dedicated stance on it as a company. So I thought that was really useful to talk about is because it is a very sensitive space to kind of engage with. So empowering people to form almost these employee driven groups around their passions has been a very useful way to kind of engage people and also engage with these elements of culture as a whole.
That is really do you think that there's a bigger rise of that now
100%. Yeah.
post-COVID?
Yeah.
Than we
100%. Especially
Mm.
where, I mean, since COVID, and I mean, the political space has always been a little sensitive and on fire, right? Like, I think that's always been the case for America. But it really has been amplified since then. And you on Facebook anytime, right? Like you're seeing stuff about it. So people are I had to lower my logins, right? Like it was not, I mean, that's not healthy for your mental health at all. So, and you're talking to a generation that lives on social media. Like they're known as the social media anxious generation. Like that was another part like that was brought up in that panel is they've been somewhat labeled the anxious generation. And I think part of that is, addictions to social media, seeing certain thoughts and insights into the landscape of politics and social issues that are happening around the world. It gives you this paradigm and world of view that everything's on fire, like everything's going wrong. And when you have
Wow.
that, yeah, it's going to cause a ton of mental health issues. So it doesn't shock me.
Well, and also too, there's professors, I mean, university professors who major in psychology or who teach psychology, and they're saying, I can't remember the one guy's name. He's in New York. I want to say that he's at Carnegie Mellon. Anyway, they're saying that the anxiousness too for the younger kids now coming up is around the competition that they feel that this need to be like other people or to be as successful or to what am I missing out on, how come this person's in this particular stage of their life and I'm not there yet, so there's this huge need to compete, so there's some anxiety around that for them as well as a result of social media.
Yeah. And there's always been, I wouldn't say always, but there's been a huge rise in these certain movements that like everyone gets a participation award, everyone wins, everyone's beautiful, everyone is equal. There's kind of like everyone. And then once you get into the actual workforce and the job landscape, it's not that case like all the time. It's competitive, right? People are fighting for these different roles and opportunities. So you kind of grow up into this world that like everyone is going to get access to everything, and everyone gets a participation award, but then you're thrown into the workforce and you quickly realize, wow, that's not the reality within this space. And that creates a lot of stress and anxiety. Another interesting thing that came up we had a session yesterday around the rise of AI and the ongoing growth of automation and just optimizing processes and just being more productive, and goals are always rising higher and higher. And since the industrial revolution, we've done a really good job at prioritizing automation and productivity. So that has, like, if you look at like a scale over the last 20 years, productivity and automation has like skyrocketed up, which in many cases has allowed companies to grow and do more things than they ever done before, which is really exciting. On the other end, productivity has also impacted our mental health in a very negative way. So it's like we're expected to do more. We're expected to be more productive than ever before. We're expected to be on more hours than ever before. So in some ways, this like productivity curse of automation has somewhat caused a well-being crisis and a mental health crisis. So now I think we're just trying to figure out, okay, how do we maintain automation and productivity and these expectations that all these technologies have provided us with, while also maintaining a sense of well-being and fulfillment and mental health, right? So that's like the magic question, I think. Yeah.
Huge challenges. It's funny you bring that up. I remember when I heard the term high volume
Oh boy.
recruiting for the first time. And yeah, because I mean, I've been recruiting before I started recruiting before the internet was even born. And so if we recruited one good person a day, we felt like we were like hot stuff. I mean, because we were like sending resumes back and forth on fax machines, and we were literally using our
Yeah.
phone to call people to recruit them. So you could only make one call at a time. It's not like you can go in now and contact 10, 20 people at a time and send out a mass email to
Yeah.
people about a position like you can now, right? So it was interesting. The first time I heard high volume recruiting, I thought, wow,
Hmm.
this is where we are. This is where we are. That wasn't a term
And if
20,
you,
30 years ago.
yeah.
Because I mean, you can only recruit one person at a time. You couldn't recruit or source, as they call it now, 20, 30, up to 50 people at a time.
Yeah, and it's kind of interesting when you get into the room of some of these private equity VC boardroom conversations about strategic planning for these companies that they're leading. The main theme that they're all talking about right now is like workforce optimization, productivity. How do we get more effectiveness out of our people? It's all based on performance, right? Like that is the name of the game right now. So that rolls down and trickles down onto the objectives and the goals and the expectations of the people within these organizations. And just when you hit one goal, you're hit with a goal that's double the feat right afterwards. And that, yeah, that creates a lot of stress. And like you said, whoa, I've never heard that term before. That sounds intimidating. Like, what does that even mean? Like, what is expect? I just got through this brutal experience of hitting my one goal. Now, like, I always thought that was funny in sales, right? Like, because I remember having like a sales role earlier in my career, and you spend all year grinding to hit this goal, and you hit it, and you feel so pumped about it, and then you have the end of year town hall celebrating those that hit their goal, and then they're like, by the way, tomorrow on the 1st of June, this is your new goal, and you're back at zero. And you're like, do it all again, and by the way, it's bigger this time.
And by the way, we're going to give you some tools to
Yeah,
increase your goals, right? And so we're going to provide you with this software that's going to help you to increase your goals. And like I said, with high volume recruiting, it's our clients. That's what they want from us. That is what we do
yeah,
in my business is we now provide high volume recruiting for our clients because there's such a demand, and it's just
yeah,
because of automation. It's just more faster. How can we just get more people hired, and how quickly can we get them hired, and what's the time to fill, and let's close the gap, and what are our metrics? I mean, it's just constant, the demand, like you said, and the stress on all these people is huge. So I'm glad that you brought up the thing about mental health because it's affecting everybody. This faster paced world we're living in. So I think I have to say I appreciate what Gen Z is coming to us with their expectations, giving us like, hey, this is what it's going to look like in the future. When you hire newer generations, this is what you can expect moving forward. It's not going to change. But how are we going to balance it, and how are we going to set realistic expectations for them? But yet at the same time, how can we slow the roll here on what we're all doing to
Yeah.
ramp everything up so quickly and to make everybody feel like they have to like go at this like faster pace and this competitive pace, if you would, in order to stay
Yeah, yeah, and I
viable.
agree. I love the cultural values that Gen Z is bringing into the workforce and what they're asking for and what they're voicing
I
for. And I
do.
think if you ask any other employee outside of that generation, they would desire better work-life integration and balance. They would also desire more development opportunities and more connections with their peers. I think what's exciting about it, Gen Z is just louder about it, and they're just a little bit more willing to call. And I think Heba brought this up during the panel. Gen Z is just more willing to call organizations out on their BS, right? Like they're more willing to actually voice it than other
Yeah.
generations maybe are willing to. But I would
Yeah.
say we share the desire for those values, right? Like I think we share the desire for a more healthy well-being and mental life within our own lives. I think we all desire a landscape within our world of social justice and equality and a healthy climate and environment within the world that we live. I think we can all agree that those are really amazing things, right? And
Yeah.
yeah, so
They are.
the the sometimes maybe like interesting like feelings that some other generations have on this, I think is interesting to see, because I think humanly we all desire those things. And maybe the annoyance is sometimes less about Gen Z having an aspiration for those things and more of the annoyance of, dang, well, I aspire it, but I haven't brought it up. Like, I haven't talked about it. I haven't voiced my opinion on it. And what gives you the right to kind of voice your opinion on it? I don't know. I think there's some type of like interesting dichotomy there.
So and you had mentioned too that there were actually two other, was it webinars, right, that you had where they were part of that discussion?
Yeah, yeah. The part that we left out in really setting the stage for that panel discussion at Transform was that this panel discussion was the executive voice of a series of sessions that we had. So we had a whole series of sessions on this topic. And throughout that series, we amplified and focused on different voices and perspectives throughout it. So we had a whole webinar that was focused on Gen Z's perspective, and we actually had Gen Z representation. We had a whole session represented on just HR practitioners. We had a whole session that was more roundtable peer discussion workshop based. And that transform session was really focused on the executive's perspective and voice. So I think that's one thing that was kind of left out in the introduction. That was like, this session that we're doing today is part of a much larger learning experience. And I've always believed, especially since leading our community at Achieve Engagement, that you can't solve some of these complex challenges with one hour long panel discussion, right? Like you need multiple learning experiences to really unpack the complexities of these situations and look at it from multiple angles. And that's why we took a whole quarter, 3 months worth of content to do that. Now we have this whole playbook of strategies and things to look at, which would not have been possible with a 60-minute panel discussion.
Now, if somebody wants to access that information, though, that entire program that you guys put together, is it available?
It is, yeah, and it's fully free and open. So one thing you can do is go to achieveengagement.org, and you'll see a tab there for resources. That's where we house all of our white papers, our research, recordings from the session. So that transform session is recorded and posted in our resource library, as well as all the webcasts and other discussions that we hosted. So you can log in there. It's all free. You can
This is
review the hours of content. I mean, that content and that research and insight, that's worth hundreds of dollars that you're getting access for free if you just go to that site. So really excited about that. Yeah.
I think that's a very
Yeah.
important to share with the community. I know, and this is very valuable information, invaluable information, Zach. I really super appreciate your input on this and just what you've shared, especially too going back on the mental health piece of it. That's huge. That's huge because it's going to be a
Yeah.
ongoing conversation. And you also mentioned DEI. That's also an ongoing. Of course, now you hear some people say, yes, it's an ongoing conversation. Others say, no, we need to take that conversation
Yeah.
off the
Yeah.
table. I mean, quickly.
Yeah, that's definitely one that's in an interesting space right now, and we're planning out our inclusion and belonging seminar program in June right now. So I'm actively talking with our members, doing some research, and just figuring out, hey, what are you seeing? What are you dealing with? What should we prioritize in terms of like the curriculum for that program? And it is really interesting to kind of see the realities that some organizations are going through right now where they're sometimes scaling back on their investment into DEI and inclusion belonging, where in 2020 2021 they really invested into building out these departments, like creating dedicated director roles for DEI and building out employee resource groups and all these different things. And now they're scaling back on some of these functions. And in some cases, a lot of people are really alarmed about that because we've been building up all this momentum around this space, and now we feel like we're moving backwards. But I think one thing that we've noticed, and I talked to one of our executive members who is a director of DEI within a larger enterprise about this, and I asked him, I'm like, what's going on with this? Like, why is this happening right now? What are your thoughts? Are you worried about your role or some of the work you're doing? And he gave up some interesting points. And one is he just said, look, the economy is in an interesting space. Companies are scaling back in many different elements of their operations. So it's not necessarily an attack at DEI, it's just scaling back on the HR operations as a whole. And I've seen that across the board where there's well-being roles and other kind of specialty roles that are kind of being scaled back and then organized to roll to the CHRO, right? So the CHRO is just having to take on more, which is really sad for our community because I see how much burnout and how spread thin they are. But I think sometimes if you look at it just as like organizational wide, a lot of departments are just scaling back in general. The other thing that was interesting that he brought up that I really haven't thought about, but he's been in the industry for 25, 30 years. He kind of said every 4 years during the political season, during election season, this always happens. He's like, HR always scales back during the political season. And what happens is these organizations kind of sit within this space and hold tight until that season's over. And he said, I bet you, watch what happens right after the political season ends, the election season happens, the HR department will scale back up and expand those roles again. So that gave me like, oh, that's really interesting. I never noticed that type of ongoing trend every 4 years. And I haven't done much, maybe like actual research into looking into that, but I kind of have a hunch if I were to look at, I don't know, certain insights over a 4 year period, I would probably find some alignments with that.
Oh, yeah. No, I can remember as far back as over 30 years ago. Every 4 years, we would see a slump, especially the last two quarters of the year during an election year. And then
Yeah.
things would pick back up again right after the new quarter of the new year after the election.
And I think, yeah, and I think one thing that too is interesting is I wouldn't say DEI is deprioritized for a lot of organizations. I think they're just reevaluating how they're going about it as well. So I think a lot of times, what
Maybe.
happened in 2020, a lot of companies were reactionary to it. They're like, "Oh my gosh, we have to do something. So let's just start doing stuff." And then they realized, you know what, maybe in terms of making an impact in this space for our company, the way we reacted to it wasn't actually effective strategically. So now they're going, okay, we've been doing this for 2, 3, 4 years now. We've learned a few things. Now we're kind of pulling back on the things that weren't working, and we're realigning and investing in the things that are working. Because when I work with our CHROs and our network, and I ask them, hey, can you share like your strategic plans for the year? What are your priorities? What are the buckets and things you're working on? DEI is still a core pillar of it. So it's not that it's not part of those plans. I think they're just starting to approach it differently after learning some things over the last 3 to 4 years.
They're approaching it from a proactive standpoint instead of
Yeah.
a reactive
Yeah.
standpoint,
And a
then,
lot of the
sounds like.
social pressures forced a lot of companies into engaging with it. And that was that reactionary, standpoint. And now they're going, okay, what does actually
Yeah.
DEI mean for us? Let's add some definitions and objectives to it. And
Mhm.
now let's be strategic with it. So I think it's actually really exciting in a way where I think the media kind of presents this whole thing of like, oh, X organization just let go their chief diversity officer, they don't care about it anymore. And it's like, no, I think in a lot of ways companies are just like stepping back out of the madness for a second, re-looking and evaluating it, and being like, okay, how do we actually be strategic and effective with this? Because we've been investing into this for 3 or 4 years and we still haven't moved the needle. So obviously we want to prioritize it, but we need to step back and reevaluate our strategies here. So
Well, and they've actually been re-strategizing and moving this around. I mean, this whole entire initiative for years. I mean, I remember when the diversity topic first came up and they started, was it it wasn't DEI, it was DIB,
yeah.
diversity, inclusion, and belonging. In fact, I remember asking a woman one time, I said, so what's the difference between inclusion and belonging? And she said, inclusion is when you get asked to the party, and belonging is when you're asked to dance.
That is a great
I go,
definition. I
oh, I
love
like
that.
that. But then they switched it. So it went from
Hmm.
DIB to DEI. And that's just happened, what, over the last maybe
Yeah.
5, 6, 7 years, something like that. I don't know. I'd have to go back and look when they were using that other acronym. You were talking about your members and how they contribute
Mm.
to these discussions. How many members do you have? And if somebody who is listening to this podcast or watching this podcast wants to become a member, is that a possibility for another executive? And how does that all work?
Yeah, absolutely. Would love to bring in obviously more leaders to participate. I think the power of the network lies within the network, right? So if we could expand that, the power and the impact continues to expand. So one, we have over, I think we're at about 27,000 some program alumni and network members within our like global audience. So, and that's open to anyone and everyone. That's where, like we talked about, the free resources on our website, the panel events, the webcasts, the virtual seminars, those are all free and open to the HR community. So those you can always join. You can go to our website, achieveengagement.org, and register for those events, join them when they work for your calendar. You can go to the resource library in there, consume resources and content, and read research that we've done in the past, and it's all housed on that site. From there, we have another sub community, which is a little bit more, I would say, exclusive in a way. It's built for leadership level HR professionals. So you have to be a C suite executive director level or VP level to qualify for that group. That we just actually launched it at the beginning of this year. So we're at about 400, 500 leaders within that sub community. And there's kind of a couple different tiers to it. Yeah, it is global. We have, people all over the world in that. And uh that we have a couple different tiers. Yeah, so there's a free version of it that you can join, and that gets you access to our community space, the membership directory. You can chat and, ask questions to each other, and it's internal practitioner only. So there's no vendors, no consultants, no advisors are allowed in there. It's truly a internal HR leadership community. And then within that, we have different masterclass or mastermind experiences. And those we actually do a pay what you can pricing model. So we'll say, hey, like the talent identification one that we talked about today, we just did a masterclass on it. That program was worth, around $500 of value. You get a facilitated training, you get a workbook and toolkit, you get the peer-to-peer group coaching to help implement it. That session itself was, valued at about $500. And then we recommend an investment of around $99 to join. But we also understand that HR leaders, they're scrapped right now from budget, right? Like they don't have this exceeding budget to invest in their own development. So that's why we support a pay what you can pricing model. So we have some people that pay the full $100. Some people pay $5 to join, and that's cool. We're okay with that. We just have to bring in some investment to pay for the development and work that we put into these resources, and it makes us the ability to scale and develop more in the future. So we try to make them as accessible as possible to a point that we have at least some revenue coming in so that we can develop more resources into the future.
That is fabulous. I'm so glad you mentioned that. And you said again, going back on your, it's
Correct.
achieveengagement.org.
Achieveengagement.org. And then if you're a internal HR leader and you want to join that sub community, it's exleadershipnetwork.org. So it's a sub community that's powered by Achieve Engagement. So they're like connected and whatnot, but it's just a little bit, separate in terms of no vendors, consultants, and things like that. And if you want to join, there's just a request access button that you press, and you would simply fill out the form, provide us information of like what role and company you work for. That's just our way to validate that you are a internal practitioner and not a vendor. And once we do that quick
Right.
qualification, we'll send you access to the space.
And then this is just for HR people, HR leaders, not for talent
I
acquisition,
guess I would
just
say we
HR.
expanded to anyone impacting the employee experience. So it
Anyone
tends to
impacting the
be,
employee
yeah, it
experience.
tends to be
That's good to
obviously
know.
HR people, but we get, director of learning and development, director of well-being, inclusion and
Sure.
belonging, DEI professionals. So we kind of have this wide ranging group.
I call it kind of
Yeah,
falls under
exactly.
talent
Yep.
management. Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, it's a very cool
This is
community.
awesome. Oh my gosh,
Thank
what a
you.
great discussion. What a great, it's so nice to
You
know
too.
you. It really is. Yeah. And I will, of course, we'll stay connected, definitely.
Yeah, thanks for having
And
me on. This was so much fun. I had a great time talking. Obviously, this is a huge passion of mine, so I could talk about this all day
yeah.
long, and I really appreciate the opportunity to do that.
Well, and I appreciate having you. I have learned something today. I have. In fact, I need to probably talk to you again before I hire anybody else so that I can do my little. No, I'm serious. I am serious. I want some
Absolutely.
of that information
Well,
prior to hiring. Yeah, for setting goals, especially as I start hiring more people too who are in
yeah.
the Gen Z group. So this is very helpful. Thank you, Zach. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you, Denise. Thanks for having me. And I look forward to being connected in the future.